If everybody would take their seats, we're going to start getting going in 1 minute. Okay, I'm going to get going just to keep us on schedule. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to your second full day at the Aspen Ideas Festival. As it would be, there were terrible rains in New York last night, and we had some problems with flights and people coming in. So the most important thing that you can do today is to make sure you have one of these, because at 10:30, there are some changes that have affected the schedule both in the morning and the afternoon, and some I just want to enunciate to you. If you were planning to go hear Curtis Sittenfeld, she did not get in. She's delayed. She will not be here today, so her session's canceled. That was at 10:30 in the Heinz Room, which is in the middle of our campus. In its place, somebody that did get in this morning at 9, I guess he's not quite here yet, Douglas Schoen, who was going to be here last night and didn't make it, is going to give a poll, the results of a poll that he's done exclusively for us that measures the Obama administration's first 6 months relative to what the American people think. And you should be there, Austin. Anyway, that will be at 10:30 in the Heinz Room. And I think he always does a spectacular job for us. It's quite insightful, and he's very thorough. He will also give sort of a review of current Americans' images of both the Democrats and the Republicans, and I think he's really interesting. It's special for us. He's here for 3 hours before he has to turn around and go back, so if you feel like going to something like that, please do. That'll be in place of Curtis. The science literacy panel is now moved to the afternoon. The plight of the auto industry is moved to the morning. That's enunciated on this. I don't want to take a lot of time to go through the schedule changes, but those are the significant ones. We will have a film tonight that's not completely sold out. It's marvelous, 1098. There are still some tickets available. They'll be in the theater later this morning. But my biggest message is, when we have these kinds of problems, please pay attention to the daily update, because that will inform you the best. And we'll have these posted everywhere, but this is an important piece of paper today, and I apologize for the inconvenience and the confusion it's going to cause, but we're doing our best to manage through that. It's my great pleasure, Maria, ready?
Sorry, Kitty.
To introduce Maria Bartiromo, who very generously is spending time with us and airing live in the afternoons from Aspen, and Austan Goolsbee. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kitty. Thanks, everybody. Great to see you in this amazing spot in the world, Aspen, and certainly during this particular time in the economy. I'm so pleased to have with us, we all are so pleased to have with us, Austan Goolsbee. He's the chief economist of the President's Economic Recovery Advisory Board, and this moment in time, Austin, has been so extraordinary. I thought we would kick it off where you giving us a bit of a status check. How's it going? What would you tell us about the moment in time that we are in terms of the economy and your time in the White House?
Well, it's certainly been an adventure. I think the general impression that people have, either on TV, in the press, in the business community, feels right to me, that we got off the floor, which was a really scary floor to be in. It's not especially good, but there are some reasons for optimism, but it's, in my view, going to take a fair amount of work in a bunch of sectors before we're really in a full-blown recovery. I mean, right now, it's glimmers of hope, not full-blown hope, I guess.
And of course, we want to know where the jobs are and where those sectors are that are still most troubled and where the opportunity is. So can you give us a sense of where the weak spots still are? Are we still worried very much about the financial sector? Do we need to get those toxic assets off the bank balance sheets? Is this one of the biggest problems still, or have we passed that moment?
There's at least two very interesting things in that question. The weak spots used to be housing, construction, and financials, the worst. Manufacturing also suffering quite a lot because it's so cyclical. I'd say financials are, it's not that it's good, obviously, but it's not, that's no longer the humongous drag on the economy that it was previously. And hopefully it will stay that way. I think the uncertainty in financials is less on the big banks and now more about small regional banks and stuff like that that we just don't have as much information on. So hopefully they are they are in as good a position as some of the bigger, healthier banks are. But there are a lot of things we just don't know about them. Housing and construction still remain a tremendous drag. As infrastructure spending ramps up from the recovery package, certainly the hope is that there would be some addressing of this on the construction side. But I think given you got, depending how you measure it, 5 to 8 million vacant homes in the country, half of those on the market, but half of them not even on the market. People just said, I can't sell the house and I don't know what to do. Strikes me that's a big reserve army of unemployed houses that makes it tough for the housing market to really come booming back. Manufacturing, again, remains, anything that's highly cyclical remains in a pretty troubled spot just because the economy has yet to fully turn around. So I'd say that's kind of the downside. To the question of the toxic assets, the optimistic thing is that everyone felt you got to get these toxic assets off the balance sheet because they're so toxic, it's pulling the system down. I think the last 2 or 3 months have been a little better. The performance of those assets wasn't quite as toxic as maybe they were afraid of. So now I think there's some view for a lot of these institutions. It's not they could still function even if some of those assets stay on their balance sheets. And you have seen that a bit with the PPIP program, which was to design a thing to get them to buy the assets off the balance sheet, has actually, a bunch of people don't feel the need to sell. So that's, for that one program has made the part of that program, the take-up hasn't been that high, but in a different way, that might be an optimistic thing.
Are we going to see that PPIP plan this week?
Well, they rolled out the PPIP. And so the plan is in the books, and they got applications on the buying side and the selling side. There are a bunch of, as you know, complicated pieces of it. There's loans, there's the securities, and there's some others. I don't know the answer of when they would get it started, but I do know that on the loan side, there hasn't been as much take-up as
with regard to housing, you said 5 to 8 million homes on the market. That's a big number. I guess that means, you have to believe that means that home prices haven't stopped falling.
In some markets, it's interesting if you just kind of, not enough credit has been given to how much prices came down. I mean, there are a lot of markets where simple measures of the bubble, like price to income ratio, they're back to levels that they were before the bubble existed. Now, that's certainly not true in every market, and there are some states where it's probably going to go down a fair bit more. The futures markets, if you're into market expectations, I think realistically believe that there's another 8 to 12% to go in the housing market.
And it depends on where you go, because
Yes,
you look at a place like Phoenix where
Exactly.
house prices were up 40% year over year for no real reason other than this urgency that let me sell my house now because I can get it 40% better.
I think it's pretty hard to look at the data and say it wasn't a bubble. I mean, in a lot of the country, there was a bubble, and it was driven by the kind of dynamic you're talking about. And people say, well, their fundamentals might not be there, but I could sell the house for even more, so I'm going to go ahead and buy it. Look, in a world like that, markets are usually pretty durable. So you go through a painful patch, but you get, if the prices come down enough, and you've seen this in some residential markets, the prices came down enough that now a bunch of people are coming back in the single family home market and saying, well, geez, if the price is this low, the affordability, the economists keep track of this home affordability index. It's kind of a measure of house prices, mortgage rates, incomes. Affordability has really seldom been this high. I guess the prices are down, interest rates, though they're up some, are still relatively low. So as I say, there are some reasons for optimism. I still think with that many vacant homes, there are going to be lots of different parts of the country where prices are still coming down.
So even though the affordability is there, some people still can't get a mortgage.
Yes.
And, credit hasn't really flowed the way I know you would like it to flow, and the administration and the world would like it to flow. A lot of people say, look, small and mid-cap companies, they can't get credit that they need.
Yes.
What is it going to take to get that credit moving again?
I think that's one of the most important things needed in recovery. Small and mid-cap companies are usually the first to be really hit when you go into a recession. They're the first to lose jobs. They're the first to have their credit dry up. And normally, when the economy comes back, they're the ones really booming back. You haven't seen that yet. Part of that's got to be due to the credit crunch. I think several things got to happen. One, the government's pressing on recovery in general and pressing on trying to get small business securitizations restarted so they could get some lending. I think the other thing we've got to be mindful of is the government can't just do this on its own. I mean, the predominant lifting, the heavy lifting's got to be done by the financial sector. So we're going to try to make the financial sector as healthy as possible. The good news coming out of the stress test is that some of the financial institutions look actually quite healthy. And banks make money by lending and by extending credit, not by retrenching. They only retrench when they really have to. And so hopefully we're going to soon be in a situation where some of the healthiest folks in the financial system say, this is a great time for us to expand. Here are a bunch of credit-worthy companies that have had a hard time getting credit, or here are people trying to borrow for houses that are safe credits, and we're going to extend them loans. For risky credits, I think we were in an unnatural period. I don't know what your view is, but the price on risk was really low. And I don't see us going back to that low of a price on risk. So subprime mortgage lending to people who want to borrow 120% of their house value, I think it'd be tough to get a mortgage for that person. And, so we're in a different world.
I don't think we want to go back to that world anyway, right?
Right.
So, there was a moment in time back in September, October, November when people were actually saying, is my money safe?
Right.
Is people's money safe?
That was creepy. I think the money look, for individuals, your money was always safe from the FDIC. And it's great testament. I mean, if you look at the Great Depression, one of the things, and it's funny, I talked with Warren Buffett, and Warren Buffett believes that, I'm not going to do justice to his quote, but it was like, what are the greatest inventions of the 20th century? And it was like penicillin, something, and the FDIC. He ranks in kind of the top three, because we broke the back of deposit-based bank runs. Because in the old days, you say, oh my goodness, if the bank is in trouble, get down there and get your money out as quickly as possible, otherwise you won't have any savings. I don't think we've ever really faced that. We no longer face that problem. We face a kind of 21st century versions of that problem. We faced them through this financial crisis, bank runs of other forms where wholesale financing of the banks, they pull the money out, or money market mutual funds, or these, we went through several scary runs. As we've gotten off the floor, I certainly hope we're out of that the business of really peak of the crisis intensity.
It feels that way.
Yeah, it certainly feels that way now. I think people felt a lot better seeing under the hood results of the stress test that, okay, if the conditions worsened by what was assumed in the stress test, here's where they'd be, and it didn't look so bad. So hopefully we're not there.
And all the capital raises, certainly.
Yeah, and I think that was part and parcel to how the banks were able to go out and raise their own money. Before the stress test, at the peak of the crisis, I think there was this feeling, as you said, of can you trust the money? And look, the banks didn't trust each other.
Right.
They knew, they were, whoa, if we have these problems, they must have even worse problems than we have. And so the interest rates on loans to each other overnight were completely through the roof. You've seen all of those spreads come down, and that's certainly made people feel a lot better.
But there's still this feeling out there that I need to be hoarding my cash, right, on an individual level. I mean, here we've got the savings rate up to what, 6.9%?
Yeah,
or so?
almost 7%.
So have people been spending stimulus money, or have they been saving it?
I think they've been doing both. The only thing I would object in the question, I don't think it's the hoarding of cash. There was a period in the crisis where it was get your money into cash and hoard that. I don't think the savings rate is up partly out of uncertainty, partly out of a natural rebalancing that we got to savings rate where if you added up literally the entire savings, private savings of everyone in the United States, it was less than nothing in 2 quarters. We had a negative savings rate.
And we don't want to be there.
We do not want to be there, okay? So part of that is a natural rebalancing. In the short run, that's difficult because we're trying to deleverage the household balance sheet at the same time as we don't want to start a massive deconsumption spiral on the GDP. The key point in this is to get growth going again. Okay, so if income starts growing by the end of the year, few percent at an annual rate, they can both increase consumption in dollars and increase their savings in dollars because they have more dollars coming in. So I think getting the economy turned around is pretty important on that front.
You said yesterday that we haven't even seen the full potential of the stimulus package. What do you mean by that?
I think that's right. But mainly what I mean by that is the strictly mechanical, something like 10% of the money has gone out the door. So it was set up to go in waves, if you will. The first wave were rapid things that, tax cuts, some of the stuff that could go out the money immediately. Then there's a middle wave of programs that prevent the programs from getting cut, various things that could increase jobs, money to the states, and some other. And then there's a longer wave. Most of the infrastructure stuff takes a bit of time to get out the door. So we still have a bunch of that coming down the pipe. And I'm actually heartened by that because not everything is rosy. And certainly if you look at the position of the states, they don't look too good. You're getting de-stimulus coming from states contracting to meet their balanced budget amendments. And so there is an upside to keeping the foot down on the recovery package. It is important to remember or to study the lessons of history. In 1936, the Depression looks like it's easing. And Congress says, hey, if it's easing, we don't need the New Deal. We don't need recovery. Let's start tightening the belt. And they raise taxes and cut spending, and it drives them into a recession in 1937 that's actually quite scary. I think we ought to at least keep that possibility in our mind when in the long run, we must put a refocus on fiscal discipline, but you really don't want to start tightening the belt until you are clear you're out of the woods on this.
How severe is the situation for the states? I mean, I know you don't like to make predictions, but I mean, can some municipalities go away? I mean, what's going to happen? We see California on the brink right now. What's going to happen here? How does this play out?
As you know, I'm going to stay out of the prediction game. It's clear that some states, my home state of Illinois being one of them, are in much worse situations than than other states. Big deficits, 25, 30% of their budget. Municipalities have been known to go through bankruptcies. There is no such thing for states. I mean, they've got to, the states are going to have to figure out each one on an individual basis how they're going to confront these. If you get into a circumstance where your spending is way above your revenues, eventually you got to deal with that. You either got to cut the spending or raise the revenues or, a bunch of states.
That sounds like America.
That sounds like America?
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. As I just said, in the long run situation, we have to confront that. My only point for the U.S. as a whole is you certainly don't want to be doing that in the middle of the deepest recession since 1929. That's the wrong time to start balancing the budget. The states face this difficult situation that a bunch of states have balanced budget amendments that say you have to balance the budget. They're in a deep, terrible recession, and they have no choice, but they say, look, you're going to have to go do a bunch of contractionary measures to deal with this in the face of that thing. It's a scary spot, but I don't see how you get out of it.
I want to get back to that a little later about where we are in terms of the U.S.'s deficit and how we put a dent to that. Because you said you either have to cut spending or you have to get revenue from somewhere else. So we'll get back to the spending and revenue. But let's talk about jobs. Where are the jobs today? Is there any job creation going on right now in the country?
Okay. On net, we're still losing jobs. It's been an awful job market since December of 2007 when the recession begins. We lost more than 6 million jobs. The rate of job loss has slowed. It's important for everybody to realize, though, how the U.S. job market works in some sense. And so you can go get the data from the various surveys of gross job creation as opposed to net. So what we see are net job destruction. On net, we lost 300 and some thousand jobs last month.
Which was better than expected.
That was better than expected, but it's still, as I said, for as long as I live, you're never going to hear me describe a loss of minus 380,000 jobs as a good report. It wasn't a good report. It was just better than the previous reports had been. But that masks job creation and job destruction. So even in periods where, like now, where we're in recession, there's still a lot of jobs being created. There's just even more jobs being lost. And they're in different sectors. They're in different states. There's a lot of, maybe you'd call it mismatch. There's a lot of fluidity that happens in the job market. It has tended to be more job creation in areas like health, in services. I'd have to go get the reports, but they've been focused more in those areas. The job losses have been more concentrated in housing, construction, and then manufacturing and things that are cyclical. The hope is if we get the GDP turned around, you would start seeing less job destruction in those cyclical areas and hopefully start getting some job creation in those areas like manufacturing. And that we could still maintain. I mean, people are still getting sick every day and having to go to the doctor. And I think the health sphere is an area where there's a lot of potential job creation. The CEA and the chair of the CEA, Christy Romer, wrote a pretty sizable report about what would be the macroeconomic impact of healthcare reform if we could reform healthcare and get healthcare inflation down. That would benefit not just the quality of healthcare delivery, but businesses would benefit and the budget would substantially benefit because the government ends up now paying a lot of the cost on healthcare. So off the top of my head, I think technology, healthcare, services tend to be the relative growth areas, but it's not a great job market for sure.
What's the biggest expense for healthcare? Why is it so expensive?
That is a hugely complicated question.
Sorry.
We're going to bring I would say in some deep level, I'm an economist, so you knew I would give the answer. I think it comes from misaligned incentives that we have a system where people are not bearing the full, they don't know what the prices are. The providers are, maybe the best way to say it is, I think it's hard work designing a system that every single person in that system thinks the system is broken. You would think that somebody would be like, no, the system's working great for me. Everyone thinks, the doctors say, this is so screwed up, we can't deal with it. The insurance companies say, it's horrible, we don't want to be in this business. The patients, the businesses, everybody recognizes that there are a bunch of things wrong. And I think a lot of it comes from incentives being misaligned, that we're not, this business, unlike most, where you're trying to provide better services, more quality for less money, we've gotten into a thing where we're competing by excluding the sick, getting better and better at figuring out who would be costly and dropping them off the rolls. The provision of services, we're not paying for quality, we're just paying you to do it. And so I think that's a big area. Though, look, preventive care, chronic disease management, the lack of use of advanced information technology, all of those things I think are huge cost drivers in the health system. But I leave open, I know a lot of people in this audience are real experts in that area, and I leave open, if we get to questions or something, I'm sure they'd have some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so much of the money goes to diseases and elderly that we could have actually prevented, right?
I agree with that.
So do we need policies in place to live healthier lives, unfortunately, because we're not doing it on our own?
Well, yeah, look, certainly to encourage it, to give you incentives to do that, I think is important. There are a bunch of, I don't know if you'd call them regional or individual businesses who have had great success at not just wellness, but also chronic disease management, preventive care, and things of that nature, where they have shown the ability to save lots of money. And I think this is a case where just the fact that you take the same person, or a very similar person with the same condition, the same health background, the same income, even the same job, and depending where they are in the country, they go to the hospital and they get very different treatments at radically different costs, sometimes factor of 2 to 3 more in Minneapolis, say, than Miami for the same disease and the same background, tells you something's deeply wrong in the system. The fact that we don't know about comparative effectiveness is weird. It doesn't make any sense. In most markets, everybody's trying to arbitrage that. People are trying to figure out, hey, in Minneapolis, they've figured out how to do this with the same mortality for half the price. Let's adopt what they do. Medicine has proved much more difficult to get that to spread through.
It seems like wherever you go, and I don't really want to say gloom and doom, because you make a good point in terms of there are areas that are actually seeing vibrancy and job creation, whether it's technology or health or services, like you said. But many places that you go, everybody's feeling squeezed. Yeah. They're looking at all of this change happening around them, change in jobs, change in healthcare, change in energy, taxes, all this stuff. And they're trying to figure out, how do I adapt? How do I need to change my own life, my own business, whether I'm a manager of a business or a consumer or an investor, whatever it is. You're trying to figure out, how do I need to adapt to figure out how I can operate and thrive in the changes around me? So what do you think about that?
Yeah, wow. The reason they feel squeezed is they have been squeezed. The last 10 years on the, I would call it the middle class, but it's really kind of the middle 80% of the country. So it's almost the whole thing has been squeezed like we have never seen for at least the period that we have economic records. As I said yesterday, traditionally the broad middle class in the country's fate, economic fate, has been directly tied to how the overall economy was doing. So when the overall economy was growing 3% a year, median incomes tend to be growing about 3% a year. In the last 10 years, two things happened. One, the broad middle's income stagnated despite there being a boom. So that has never happened before.
I have to come back at that because they were invested through their pensions in the stock market. They were invested in 401ks. They saw their valuations go higher. You can't really make a blanket statement.
I'm talking about their incomes.
Okay.
So then that would be an argument that their net worth was going up more, and it might explain why savings rates were low. Is people could say, hey, their house was growing, their stocks were growing, so they didn't feel they needed to save. But I'm talking
that's
about
important too.
It is important. Okay. That's critically important. But I'm talking about their incomes from their jobs. Income stagnated over this period. So it was the first boom in U.S. history where the median family income fell by $2,000. And it's not just the person at the median. The broad middle class income stagnated. And while that happened, you saw the costs of several, what I call the 21st century version of the necessities. Sending your kid to college, getting health insurance. For a considerable period of that, the cost of gasoline and energy going way up, food way up. A series of areas where costs are shooting through the roof. At the same time, their incomes are getting smushed. That led to a squeeze, as I say, like we have never seen before. And that, I think, is why people felt really squeezed. It also meant no margin for error if anything went wrong, like, say, biggest recession since 1929. What are you going to do?
Collapse
the
the
answer
value
was
of your
go
home.
to your house. Yeah, exactly. Pull the money out. Uh-oh, house values. So the reason why people got into a panic was they were in a tough spot. I mean, and it wasn't a tough spot that just happened. It was in no way random. This thing was building up for 8 years, 10 years, and we got to that point. Now, that's not something that can be turned around in a month or a quarter. It's going to take some time to try to reverse these trends. And you've seen households saving more. Boy, if you lost 30% of your 401k, your house lost 20% of its value. That's a tough readjustment. The adjustment to that is really difficult. Now watch this. I'm like the president.
You got him. Now that video will run everywhere. Like the president swatting the bug. That video ran out.
He taught me the fly Jedi mind trick
in
the campaign.
You're good.
So I think in terms of the adjustment, we've got to get the government's got to help here. The private sector's got to come back because ultimately long-term growth comes from the private sector. It's not the government. We can try to prevent the worst from happening, but we've got to get the private sector growing again. People have got to, if we are able to do that, we can start moving the other way. Instead of squeeze, what's the opposite of a squeeze?
Expansion?
Okay, so we're going to relieve this squeeze. I think that's important. And then I hope that in the wider world, each person, if you're waking up and trying to figure out what to do for your own career,
what do I need to do as an individual,
that's the
as a business? What do I need to do to figure out how to adapt to this environment?
I think it's depending where you are in your career, getting as many skills as you can, being open to innovation, technology, across the board in almost all industries, you've seen tremendous productivity growth over 25 years. You want to be on the upside of the productivity growth, not fighting the battles to let's keep business how it is, right now or how it was 15 years ago.
Look for where the jobs are.
Yeah, I think you got to. The good news is everybody is looking for where the government doesn't have to come down and tell you should go into, software programming, because everybody wants to have a career, so they're out trying to figure out where are the jobs, and they're talking to people, and they're seeing where business is growing. I think that openness to flexibility, which has historically been a great strength of the U.S. economy, over the next year, that's going to be increasingly important.
Okay, you said you got to get the private sector moving again.
Yes.
I know you know this is coming, Austin, and I don't want you to think I'm going to ask you this every time we talk, but let me go through a couple of the administration's policies. card
She's
check.
been accumulating them. Here we go.
Of course I
You're
have.
Oh, no.
Higher taxes on the profits of your foreign operations. Higher taxes on people who are making more than $250,000. Is the administration anti-business?
No, the administration is not anti-business. And I think we can go through any of these if you want. Any of these that you want.
I mean, why take
specifically.
away the break you get from giving money away, the charitable donation? I don't get that. You know charitable
take it
donations
away.
are going to go off a cliff. You know that.
I am happy to provide you the evidence on the subject. The issue was the following. On charitable donations, it doesn't take it away. It limits for people at I'm going to be the least popular guy here. Thanks a lot.
No, I'm sorry. Let's get the issues on the table and figure it out.
The issue is as follows. You got two people, one in the 35% bracket and one in the 28% bracket. If you make $50 million a year and give a $100 donation to charity, it's worth more to you than a person that makes $50,000 a year and gives that exact same donation to their church, because the deduction is bigger because the tax rate is bigger. So the view was put the deduction to be the same for everybody above, it's the difference from 35 to 28%. I think there is a great deal of evidence in the literature of how much does that affect charitable giving. And the answer is a 7-point change is not, I do not believe that donations would fall off a cliff.
Okay.
Now, nobody wants to, we're in a situation where nobody wants to, taxes don't go up for fun. That's not a fun thing to do. What we're trying to scheme out is, over the long run, how do you restore fiscal responsibility to the country? And part of that is extensive spending cuts, controlling healthcare spending, and part of it is acknowledging that we have come through a period where taxes at the very, very highest levels were unsustainably low. And in a world where you had the squeeze I'm describing on 80% of the country, where their incomes stagnate and their costs have been rising, they have no savings and no margin for error. I just really don't think that multiple trillions of dollars of additional tax cuts for millionaires is the most important thing pressing for the country. We've got to make investments in the healthcare system, in energy, in the education system. If we don't do that, look, as I say, if you go look at the statistics, we were always number one in the world in the share of our 25-year-olds that had a college degree. Take that as a measure of the skills of our people. We were number one in the world, and we are now, I believe, 25th or 22nd. We are just behind Bulgaria and just above Costa Rica. Now,
in terms of skill set,
share of people 25 years old today that have a college, that have graduated from college. It doesn't take a PhD in economics to know that 25 years from now, if you have the skill levels between Bulgaria and Costa Rica, you're going to have the incomes between Bulgaria and Costa Rica. And the American people are not. Now, I had a graduate student from Bulgaria got very offended that I said that. What are you saying about Bulgaria? I'm not all of the American people. That's not us. That's not the America that we grew up in. Nobody is going to. We are not going to do that. We are going to be, the richest major country in the world. And the way we're going to do that is by making investments, especially in the education of our people, but in our healthcare system, in an energy policy that makes sense so that we could generate green jobs and, start a whole new sector that could be a great advantage to the United States economy. And to do that, you got to make choices about the priorities. And I really don't think that the Bush choices that let's spend literally multiple trillions of dollars on high-income tax cuts, on a practical level, I just don't think it worked. Look out the window. I mean, the economy is not booming, despite us having more tax cuts at the high end than ever before in U.S. history. I just don't think that it worked.
No, I think most people, and actually, let's do a show of hands. Most people would say, I want to pay my fair share. I want to pay, if we're going to have an economy under the Clinton administration.
Who wants to pay more taxes?
No, you don't mind. You want to pay your share, right? I mean, you want an education system. You want health care that works, right?
Okay,
but
please deposit your names and addresses here. We can use that.
But let me ask you this. I mean, you said we got to get the private sector moving again.
I agree with that.
Do you not need to put some incentives in place for business?
No, you do.
But I don't see them. Let's talk about the incentives in place.
That announced that, look, with the international. Look, I agree. I totally agree.
So where are the incentives?
Senator Bartiromo.
See, I've got the.
Hold on. Look,
people are on my side.
The president. Take the international tax thing that you described. The president, through the campaign, said, look, we're going to end the tax breaks that assist companies or give them incentives to ship jobs overseas. And we're going to take money and we're going to give tax breaks to companies that are growing and trying to build things in the United States. The president's budget makes the R&D tax credit permanent for the first time. We have had a situation in this country where the R&D tax credit, nobody wants to pay for it. So they'll say, well, it'll be temporary, it'll go for a year. The evidence is overwhelming that it's extremely effective at both bringing in very high-level jobs to the country, but also that R&D is the backbone of the future industries and of the productivity growth in American industry. He calls for making the R&D tax credit permanent. You have not heard boo about that. I bet if I asked all of you, you didn't even know that was true. He's called for setting the capital gains rate to 0 for small businesses and startups. I bet if we asked around, you'd say, I didn't know that was true, because this image that the president is anti-business or the administration doesn't care, it's completely false. The president has been in the recovery package about cutting taxes as much as possible. We put off the raising of any taxes until after we're out of this recession that we're growing again. And in the case of business, I think a priority the president has is let us find ways to reduce the corporate tax rate, but to do so by broadening the base. Right now, we have the highest corporate tax rate in the world on the books. And we have the 4th lowest corporate taxes actually paid in the developed world.
Nominal versus real.
No, not nominal. This is just divide taxes by income. And the answer is there's tons of exemptions. There's tons of deductions. If you borrow money, you're paying 0 corporate tax rate. All the interest is deductible. You're getting accelerated depreciation. There are some companies that are facing negative corporate tax rates, effective tax rates.
Who?
If you have high depreciation allowances, low margins.
Who's facing negative corporate tax rates?
The effective tax rate is negative for a lot of low margin, big investment industrial companies who have lots of debt. Because if you have lots of debt, you get your tax rate, the tax rate you face on the margin down to 0. And then you also get accelerated depreciation. So you're getting actually rewarded for making investment. You're not paying a tax on it. We have the highest variability in tax rates within an industry of any country in the world. So take a bunch of companies in the same industry competing against each other. They're paying hugely different tax rates because some of them have got multinational operations and they're piping profits into Bermuda or wherever. Others are just domestic. They have little debt. They're paying the full freight 35% rate. Others, so let us reduce the corporate tax rate by broadening the base and leveling the playing field and making America more competitive. I think the president's totally on board with that. And actually, I think if you go through his budget, you would be surprised to find there are a lot of things in there that if somebody else had done it, they would be trumpeting it as, look at how pro-business we are.
We're going to get to the audience in a second. If you do have a question, just get up to the microphone, and because I'm going to turn it over to you guys actually in about 1 minute. The final question on this topic, Austan. Yesterday, you interviewed Indra Nooyi, the CEO of PepsiCo. She's in Beijing because she just opened a plant in Beijing. She said she's going to open 10 more plants in Beijing. Do you worry that this this issue, taxing on international profits differently, different taxation than we've seen for the last couple of years, is going to increase the number of companies that go offshore. And I mean, you know, the whole thing is incented to have companies have jobs here, and yet companies are saying, you know what, this is too big of a hit. I'm taking my plants to Beijing.
Now, see, I disagree a little because we have always had worldwide taxation of U.S. corporations. So taxes apply to your operations in China. What this would change is if you want to deduct your expense, but you didn't have to pay those taxes until you brought the money back to the U.S. So the money just sits over there, and they don't bring it back.
So what happens?
This
they don't bring it
changes
back,
it
and then
so that
they have to bring it back at some point.
No, what they try to do is use that to finance investments outside the U.S. So they never end up bringing the money back, and they never pay the tax.
But it still goes in their overall earnings.
It's in their overall earnings, but they're just keeping the money out of the U.S. precisely because they don't want to bring it back. This says it doesn't abolish the deferral of paying your taxes. It simply says if you want to deduct the expenses of your operations over there from your U.S. taxes, you got to bring the money back. So, but if you're going to deduct the interest, if you're going to deduct the depreciation, what have you, you got to bring the money back. It doesn't get you out of paying it. To say this is doing the opposite of encouraging you to move the factory overseas to avoid paying tax. Right now, you move the factory overseas and you can avoid paying tax. The reason why these companies are upset is because this is going to make them start paying taxes on the profits they're earning on these factories in China rather than waiting until the money comes back. So it does not give them an incentive to go say, hey, forget this, I'm moving to China.
So you're not worried about that?
Well, that part of it, the issue that is of concern to business is simply they don't want to have a higher corporate taxes. And look, it's perfectly fair. The thing that I want to point out is there's huge disparity in tax rates across companies in the same industry. So for every Pepsi, there's, soft drinks are such a huge economies of scale. But say there's Joe's Soda Company.
Not Coke, not Coca-Cola.
Not Coke. That's just domestic, that doesn't have any debt. They're paying 35%. So, there are many equities that have to be balanced here, and I actually think it's more complicated than that.
It's an important distinction to make, Austin. Yeah. Okay, let's get to the audience, and then I want to ask you about Buy American. Yes, sir.
First, a comment before a question. One of the things that's disheartening on all this discussion about tax policy is that it's in sound bites, and it's an incredibly complex subject. But looking at an area where there are reasons for this disparity is the gaming of the system. And the taxation of worldwide profits has been, particularly since the 70s, an area of tremendous gaming of the system. And what the administration has done is just put its toe in the water on that gaming. It's a very, very modest proposal. The real issue is the moving of income to low tax jurisdictions.
The mic went out.
A multinational generally does not make a decision to locate a manufacturing facility or assembly facility based on tax policy unless it may be a pharma company or electronics company which has an easily transportable product.
So what's your question, sir? I'm sorry, because the mic is out.
This discussion, the way you phrased it, which may have been to provoke, an answer, is are you against business by this change in foreign tax policy is not even a fair question.
I like this.
Okay.
This man's jib. Yeah, he's mad at you. He's not mad at me.
It's not a fair question because it's too superficial a way of expressing it. Now, getting to my question, has there been academic research?
Who agrees with him?
Hey, okay.
Now to my actual question. Has there been academic research that has debunked University of Chicago driven trickle-down economics.
Hey, I'm from the University of
I know
Chicago.
where you're from.
You
It
got to
has-
give us a question.
But that's the question. Is there academic research that
There's a ton of academic research on the question. Let's take the specific of the Laffer curve and do tax cuts generate their own revenue? Yes, the evidence is totally overwhelming. They do not. It's completely refuted that idea. I can give you all the citations if you want.
So the last 8 years was predictable insofar as the effects of those tax cuts. Economic effect. I'm not talking about the. I'm not talking about the.
I'm not sure. Yes and no. Look, as I say, on that specific point, I just think you can't. How many different ways can you say this fundamentally isn't true? Look, the Laffer curve doesn't work. Tax cuts do not generate their own revenue, except in extraordinary circumstances where the tax rate is already really high, and the amount of adjusting of behavior is very easy to do.
So let me follow up then. We're not going to get the revenue just from higher taxes to make a dent in the deficit. What programs would you recommend cutting?
The president has outlined. You're aiming for the clap.
Now I'm mad.
Okay, look.
Okay, you don't want to do that.
Number one,
I'm just kidding. Thank you for that question.
the president outlined let's call it in the short run. I told you don't want to have any higher taxes or cutting of spending when you're trying to get out of recession. So we're talking about medium or long term. In the long term, it's totally clear to anybody who sits down and looks at the data that healthcare cost inflation and the cost of healthcare is by far the most important thing facing the budget. So the centerpiece of the healthcare effort on the part of the president is how do you change the inflation rate of healthcare and get the cost of healthcare down? That is a cost reduction. It's a spending cut, if you want to call it a spending cut, of overwhelming importance, and it's the key thing that we must do. It's why we have to do healthcare reform now. We should do it now for health reasons, but we must do it soon, even for budget reasons. In the medium term, the president outlined $17 billion of cuts for a single year. They've looked at Medicare, the Medicare Advantage program. We created a subsidy for private Medicare insurance to compete against Medicare. And the data has shown overwhelmingly that it's less efficient than regular Medicare. So it's essentially gets you Medicare with more administrative expenses. And so the president's view is let's get rid of that. So why subsidize guys to be inefficient? Let's get rid of that program. That's many billions of dollars a year. In student loans, we subsidize private banks to do student loans when the direct student loan program, the data shows, is more efficient, and that we're subsidizing guys to be less efficient. And so they've said, let's get rid of the subsidies to the inefficient and replace them with just expanding the direct student loan program. Those are three off the top of my head that probably add up to $30 billion.
$30 billion, and the deficit is?
Look, as I say.
What's the number?
No.
What's the number, Austin?
No, you're not going to. You're trying. This is a trick.
All right.
But we've got long enough.
Look,
you're not going to trick
You're a good
me on
guy,
this one.
and I'm not. Let's
Look.
go to the next question.
Oh, you just saw the trick in action.
There you go.
It's not true at all.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question that someone posed yesterday when Eric Schmidt from Google was here.
Oh, I was going to say, and I didn't answer it yesterday.
And-
I was going to say,
I'm not gonna answer
go
today
on
either.
this side. Yeah.
And Eric had no reply other than to say he was extremely frustrated and trying to get the ear of the administration on this very important point. But before I ask you the question, I just want to preface it by saying that I think we all feel you've done a remarkable job of keeping the wheels on the road.
Oh, no. Have you seen,
I mean,
has your child
Great.
ever come in and
Yes.
said, Dad, you are so great. I love you so much. What did you break? What happened?
Exactly.
Here it comes.
And well, since there's no question, since September we've been in crisis and you've
Yes.
kept the wheels on the road. I think many of us, as we look down the road to recovery, we're pretty concerned on a couple of fronts. The first is it looks like you're paving it with other people's money given the deficit spending, namely China's. if you look way down this road. The other factor that concerns me is I don't believe we're ever going to spend our way out. We've got to innovate our way out. And if you look at the companies, Cisco's, Genentech's, Google's, if you look at their employee population, a lot of them were non-US born. I teach at Stanford. I've been on the faculty in the engineering school since '94. When I started, I teach at the graduate level. When I started in '94, 50, 60% of my students were non-US born. Today, 50, 60% non-US born, no change. What has changed is in '94, they all stayed. Now, they all leave. My big idea is, can you give my students an H-1 visa? And maybe can you take some of the stimulus? Can you take some of that stimulus and stimulate innovation by putting out a call around the world to all citizens of the world who have advanced degrees and were in the top 10% of their class, give them an airplane ticket, an H-1 visa, and a job?
It's a great question. Thank you for that. This is another major issue everybody talks about, Austin. How are we going to get this?
Anybody who's been in higher education knows that the market for talent is a world market. That's especially true in science and engineering. As you know, immigration is not my field, but the immigration issue is a humongous, multi-pronged, high-skill immigration is an important component. I've talked with a bunch of people out in Silicon Valley, and my understanding is they estimate that fully 1 out of every 2 startups in Silicon Valley is started by somebody who was not born in the United States. So my own view is we ought to be extremely mindful of things that could create jobs in the U.S., and if it's getting talented people to stay in the U.S. and become U.S. citizens, I think that's important. I do think that can't be done in isolation. That sounds great as a, hey, look, in isolation, let's do this one thing. There are a whole bunch of, that's part of a humongous immigration debate that takes place across many different aspects, both high skill, medium skill, low skill, what countries people are coming from, what form the immigration is going to take, where do people go. And the president has said he's open to looking at I like the way you asked the question, as opposed to the people who say, let's have a debate about should they raise the number of H-1B high-skill visas by 20,000. That's too particular. That's not the way we ought to be asking it. But the president has said he's open to looking at a whole bunch of ideas in this area, but wants that to be part of broader immigration reform, doesn't think that can just be done on its own.
But if it's a critical element to innovation, you need to address it as such.
I believe it is
None
important.
of the growth we've experienced in Silicon Valley would have occurred without the influx of brain talent to the United States. It's been cut off. It has to be corrected.
I believe it's important. I completely agree with that.
It sort of dovetails into the issue that I mentioned a minute ago, which is Buy American. I mean, what the priority, let's face the reality. The priority is getting jobs for Americans, right? I mean, come on. So, it's something that we're facing right now, but this is a major issue for our country. We may very well cut off innovation if we are eliminating the prospect of smart, talented people coming here from other countries.
I agree that's important. I don't want us to think that's the only important issue for innovation in this country, because it isn't the only issue. But I agree that's an important issue. I didn't say anything that contradicted anything you said. You guys are just wanting to punch me.
No.
On
That's
Buy
not true.
American.
Yeah.
Buy American is Buy American plays into the issues of protectionism and
but this
the
does
U.S.
too.
Nationalism, and I agree. So in that sense, it's. So I think she was asking more from the perspective of innovation.
Absolutely.
And I'm told there is a large group within the administration which is really very concerned about and interested in the issue of innovation. And like this, let's make the R&D tax credit permanent. That's one small thing of. There are people who recognize that the long-run growth of the country depends on entrepreneurship, the founding of new industries, being flexible, innovating, and improving productivity in this country. That's how you improve the standard of living. On Buy American, look, I'm from the University of Chicago. You're never going to find somebody who's more, for free trade than me. There is the danger that to do Buy American things will lead people to be protection against us.
Which
people
is what
that
happened.
are for, but the people that are for the Buy American provisions say all the other guys, many other countries have already had buy whatever things on their own, and we ought to do this in retro. In China's stimulus, they've got a whole bunch of provisions that are about buy Chinese,
right.
And so we ought to do the same. I wish we could ratchet down the rhetoric. I think you've seen the president being pretty thoughtful on this issue and pretty responsible in a bunch of areas. The president, in his own remarks about the energy bill, there is discussion about should there be a tariff applied to the carbon content of goods coming in the United States. And the president said he was worried that to go in that direction could lead to, I forget if he's, trade wars or that kind of thing. We should be mindful of that. There's no question. But you can understand the feeling of people saying, look, it's our money. We're using Americans' money. We're borrowing to create jobs in America. Why not have something that's going to make sure that the jobs are in America and not somewhere else, and then they're going to ship
Well,
it.
anyhow,
So
he
I think
didn't listen to Eric. Hopefully he'll listen to you. But Maria, will you ask him if he doesn't answer him?
I'll be there. No, I mean, I think it's a fair point. Isn't it fair to say, though, that while the H-1B visa issue is an important issue that you're and the administration is looking at, the priority is to make it homegrown, focus on education,
Yes.
put money to education, and make
Look,
Americans,
that's why, yes,
right?
that's
Okay.
exactly right. And that is why I say the debate over H-1B visas, like should we increase the cap, there are arguments for and against. Everybody acknowledges that in the long run, that's not the solution. That's a short run solution. In the long run, we want to create an environment where people within the U.S. or who come to the U.S. can study, can become great scientists, engineers, or what have you, and stay and create companies.
Next question.
Yes, candidate Obama and President Obama have enlightened and clearly articulated policies, which I support, and I think many of the people in this room do, about things that we desperately need. Healthcare, environment, education, energy. My question is for the believers, what specific measures are in place to make sure that when the stimulus funds are doled out, it's based on those policies and not politics, so that we're not singing "We Won't Be Fooled" again?
It's a good question. It was the biggest stimulus recovery package in U.S. history, even as a share of GDP, bigger than the New Deal. So it's got hundreds of moving parts. The answer to that question depends on which part you're talking about.
Pick one.
Okay, so the vice president's office, but the overriding answer is the vice president's office, the Ed DeCiv, they brought in a guy whose job is to be manager of, let's call it the implementation of the recovery package. Now, I hope you're not, we live in a democracy. So if you're saying, well, how can we eliminate congressional influence on legislation?
Lobbyist influence.
It can't be done. Lobbyists, as you know, this administration has been far stricter on its disclosure, transparency, and forbidding of lobbying than any previous administration. On the stimulus itself, anybody that's a lobbyist that came to lobby for stimulus money was required to put in writing what they were saying. They could not come in and in a back room say, oh, please give me this. They had to put it in writing, and they made that public. I think disclosure and sunlight is actually critically important on the lobbying aspect. I thought you were saying more of the political influence on where the money gets spent. Look, we're in a democracy. Congress is in control of appropriation. The administration has had influence on what areas the stimulus package took. Ed DeCiv and the Vice President's office is overseeing the implementation of the package to make sure, forget about political influence, that there is not waste and that we're getting the money into the system, both of which I think are really critically important. But if you got $787 billion, that is more than a full-time job, making sure that the money's getting spent wisely, and every day we're trying to deal with that and confront that.
Thank you.
All right. Well, this is the macroeconomic question coming from the molecular biologist, so it feels way out of left field. It's the Ideas Festival, so bear with me. You guys seem to be pretty astute scholars of Keynesian theory and have used some very strong levers based upon, shall we say, the retrospectoscope of 1929. But in some ways, when Hoover handed over the keys to FDR, the Dow had already dropped from 350 to 50. And so you're picking up in a slightly different position than where we are right now. So my question for you, in a very generic sense, is of the major variables that you have before you between trade, inflation, taxes, and let's say over the next 8 years, give you 2 terms, what are the variables that have the most beta, the things that you have the least certainty over, based either on historical assessment or based upon uncertainty that you're dealing with right now, as far as executing your strategy?
I appreciate the sophistication of that question. I believe my questions in molecular biology would not nearly meet that threshold. To the question of so are you asking what are the big unknowns? Like what are the
levers that you're not sure whether or not they're actually going to do what you think they'll do?
I guess I would answer that by saying the following 2 or 3 things are worrisome, and they're what we keep an eye on, which is different from saying what policies are not going to. If we thought there was a bunch of policies that fundamentally we're really not sure if they work, we would not have been near as excited to try them. So there's less in that front. The performance of the world economy, if that does really badly, there are some people who think that the rest of the world is kind of 6 to 9 months behind the U.S. in economic conditions, so that they're really deep. What the last quarter of 08, first quarter of 09 was to the U.S. is still online to happen in other countries. If you believe that, U.S. exports are going to go way down, and that's going to be a severe drag on the GDP. 2, I'd say commodity prices, oil, other resources. We saw in the recent past those things could really shoot up, and that can throw a bunch of wrenches into recovery. I'd say that's a worry. And the 3rd would be if there was something that led to a further downturn in the economy, or some really much more than expectations downturn in assets like house prices or stocks, such that it again put the financial system in jeopardy. That would be a really scary spot. I mean, that was the scary spot we were in when we came into office. Hopefully we're kind of out of the woods on a lot of those, but those are probably the 3 that I think.
So is there a maximum of the leverage that you can use from the stimulus standpoint? I understand you've only done 10% so far.
Well, the stimulus money is set, accounted for, the bill is passed.
Yeah.
It's going to be going out to do what all of the programs are in the stimulus. There's not you can't go down and say, okay, well, there's $650 billion left. Let's start building some, new houses for people, or, let's buy up a beachfront property. The money's is going for different programs that hopefully are good impact programs.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you, Maria. Somebody shouted out something about card checks, so I thought I'd ask the question more formally. There was an article in Roll Call yesterday, the Capitol Hill magazine, that Senator Harkin plans to introduce the Employee Free Choice Act in July. I understand it's been amended, but the thrust of the bill would be to make it easier to organize unions in non-union workplaces. And I understand President Obama supported the legislation during the campaign. From your economic perch, can you explain any of the economic benefits that would come to the United States from more unionization in the industry?
It's a good question.
Okay. Let me first start by saying I'm not going to talk about a specific, any specific legislation. As you probably know if you follow this, labor stuff is not I'm an economist, and this is not exactly my area. But my understanding is there are many different versions of employee free choice. That the Employee Free Choice Act is a bit of a misnomer. So I don't want to get into what exact details are. There is a lot of disagreement within the economics profession about the role of unions. There is a substantial body of research by some people that say some significant component of the what they call the hollowing out of the middle class, but the decline as unionization rates have declined, so also has the fate of the middle class not been as robustly tied to the growth of the country. And so you can look at different ways to try to restart growth of middle class incomes. And there are a bunch of people who believe that unionization is one important component of that, that in a world where until a year and a half ago, corporate profits, really less, until 8 months ago, corporate profits were at record levels as a share of GDP and had been for numerous years. And in a world where the median family income's fallen $2,000 over the course of the boom, and corporate profits are as high as they have ever been in recorded U.S. history, at the least you got to say, if there is some balance to be made between labor and business, that maybe we had shifted, far along that continuum one way or the other. Now, I'm no expert on Employee Free Choice Act or any of these labor issues, but I think that's kind of the centerpiece of where the discussion comes from.
I want to thank you, Austin. It's not easy to be the only face of the administration here answering so many questions in such a complex economy. We really appreciate your candor. Austan Goolsbee, thank you, everybody.